let's fucking begin the interesting and scary side of things, shall we? So our first point here is basically kicking us off. I'm not going to be saying where we're looking to take part in that side of things, as I'm sure all of you are relatively aware, and how we're going to be going about that process. Sovereignty on its own is a difficult process when it comes to being able to acquire it. When we get down to the roots, right, of setting all that stuff up, it is a pain in the backside. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of pre-prep and all that sorts of jazz that takes part into that sort of stuff. Be that in Tenerife or elsewhere. When it comes down to the infrastructure placement, the general ADM upkeep, and all that sorts of stuff, we'll go system by system to ensure that sort of stuff happens. As some of you guys are already aware, doing some ratting fleets, doing some mining operations, general construction, building of doctrines, all that sort of stuff. All of that goes into the aspect of taking sovereignty as a whole, because the build up allows us to then fulfill the end process, which is the acquisition of Solve. And we'll get there as we, project ourselves down the weeks and months as we move forward as an organization. So it moves me on to my second point here, because we've got a couple of them, so I'll try to keep each one of them brief. Our next point here is industrial projection. As I've got a lot of you in different SIGs, such as Celestial Wolves, Guerrilla Crew, and the Industrial Crew. For the indie side of things, I'll be having you work with your SIG leads specifically to do as much industrial creation of doctrines as we can possibly get, as much moon goo we can get in, as much asteroids, just generally minerals across the board as we can get in. We're going to try to implement with every member that we have to have PI flowing through the buyback just en masse. And the reason we need as much PI as we can get is because when it comes to the production of capitals, for example, we're going to need quite a bit of it. Gas is also going to be another thing, but that will come later down the line. We can either acquire that through market, or with the help of the boys in the Celestial Wolves squad, we can have signatures scanned, make sure we have wormholes up, and go diving for the gases that we need them, connecting different regional points for the indie guys to then go and do their thing. It's all a full circle project, effectively, as a whole, if we keep up the activity and continue going where we need to go in that direction. This leads me on to the third point, which is PvP projection. Smiley's recently been appointed as the Guerrilla Crew SIG lead, and I think that's fantastic because he's kind of just been thrown in there. It's great because it means you've got somebody who I personally feel is a good individual to have. He's new, he's boisterous, and he's more than happy to give you guys shit where it's necessary. And that's kind of the individual you need in that sort of lead role. Now, PvP projection is not necessarily, or not. Let me backtrack a little. It's not wholly tied to just PvP. It kind of meshes with the PvE side of things as well. Should really be a PvP/PvE projection, both basically. The reason we want to be able to have focus on both aspects is one makes you direct income, and the second one increases the corporate activity on Zekiel side of things. Now, Zekiel is important for two reasons. One, the more kills we have as an organization get shown on there, which amplifies as activity, because the unfortunate side it is for things like production, industry, PvE, and that sort of stuff, when folks are just chilling and relaxing, that doesn't get shown on Zekiel. It's a pain in the ass, but that's just how it works. Unless there was an application or website that done that, then you would get different levels of projection to be able to be shown across that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, through API identifiers and through what CCP has, there's no real metric from which to measure that unless you're going through the mining ledger and that sort of stuff, but that's its own thing. So there has to be some form of PP projection so that it shows activity for the organization. The reason why that is important isn't necessarily to say that we're seeming quiet. It's actually the opposite. We're quite loud. It's more simply to state that the guerrilla crew as a whole isn't tied specifically to that aspect. I don't want you guys to be focusing in that as much as you're able to do so in terms of ratting. Ratting fleets are fantastic to get you guys used to how fleet operations work. It's a soft way to get you into projection of operations like CTAs and strats. If you're not used to that sort of compositional layout, and you're not used to where positioning works for things, you can use ADM fleets like ratting fleets to be able to get a handle on that. It's a soft way to go about it. This moves me on to our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth point. Here's the background noise. The kids are fucking alive.
May I suggest a baseball bat?
I'm thinking of the window, to be honest. So our next point here is guerrilla warfare. From guerrilla warfare, what I want you guys to be doing as much of after the initial PvP projection realistically is something that I'm going to be teaching you. So if you don't have an understanding of what guerrilla warfare is, it's basically attrition tactics. So think of it like if you've ever played FPS games where you're holding singular zone control and the other guy has point B, for example, and you want to move forward and take that area to have that sort of control, it's basically those tactics. Pushing and pulling consistently in multiple different zones. It's that tactic, but put into Eve, and you can use that for any system in the game. It doesn't matter where it is. It can be in high sec, it can be in low sec, it can be in wormhole space. It applies there as well. If you're not experienced in it, I'll be teaching you guys that sort of stuff when we go out on roams. Whenever we're doing that sort of stuff, when we're going from system, we're backtracking to see if we've got any folks who are lagging behind or pulling off from their fleet and they're moving too far forward, try to catch up to us, that sort of stuff. Or if we're moving away from other hostile fleets and doing the exact same, and we're intentionally baiting them into us and then going from there. Those all tie into guerrilla warfare tactics because it's all about evasion as well as the control point objective. Both of them work together. And you have different branches to this as well. It kind of branches into terrorism, black ops, reconnaissance, and all that sort of stuff. It's its own facet. It's pretty expansive. Ironically, terrorism and black ops kind of comes into that, but I'm not going to touch on them too much because mostly because it might get a little bit chewy for you guys to understand. I'll give you a brief though. Terrorism basically is things like freight movement. So if you understand where jump freighter routes are based off of, you go and strike at those connection points, whether that be in Astra houses, radars, doesn't matter. If the jump freighters are located in those areas, you go after them. You either ref the structures or you put in bubbles or you boost things and that sort of stuff, and you go after the freighters. By killing supply lines, you depreciate an organization's capacity to be able to hold itself up. The more you do that and the more consistent you are, especially depending on the size of the organization, is where terrorism works. That also couples in with Black Ops because a lot of the time you're going to be using sinos to make sure you have force projection, which means enough boys, like 20, 30 boys, in that system at once. That is the force, as in you guys, projecting forward. That's what that means. Both of those are tied together. Also works with guerrilla warfare and ties in with Black Ops as well. The other alternative to this is things like jump bridges, antiplexes, this is the same thing, but TCUs, IHubs, subs, and that sort of shit, and rolling along with those organizations, those operations, excuse me. So this moves me to our final 2 points, which I'll cover in one. one being allies and the next one being a future as an alliance. So we've got a couple of different allies at the moment. I'm not going to say their names, but we're going to be moving forward with those guys. One of them you are already aware of, who are assisting us with a lot of things going forward. They've been an ally to the DA for a number of years. So it's not like a short-term thing or anything like that. It's not that we knew them in the last year or two. We've known them for about half a decade. We've done significant operations with them, high sec, low sec, as well as wormhole space. So it's been a long time coming that something like this ends up becoming a thing. And I see it as a pretty bright outlook when it comes to actually being able to project forward as an organization. And this couples into a future as an alliance. We're a relatively small corporation, but we're also growing. I don't want to say week by week at this point. We've slowed down a little bit, but before we'd slowed down, we were growing week by week, and now we're beginning to ramp that back up again with 2 new faces. So what I'm looking at here is, as we continue to grow, we flesh out our time zones, and that's really going to be where we shine at the most, because we're US heavy with some European time zone. The more we flesh out the European time zone, the more the US looks kind of darker, and it kind of goes back and forth. The more we push down that regard, both in recruitment, both in you guys doing PvP, or just generally going on operations and talking to other people, the more noise you create, the more propaganda you make and all that sort of stuff, Reddit posts, videos and that sort of stuff. All of that goes out there. It's all good noise. It's all good propaganda. And that just makes our capacity as a soon-to-be alliance that much more fruitful.